I want to talk more about decentralized autonomous organizations. I've started reading some of the resources that are available at Electric Capital, which is a venture capital firm that focuses on crypto investments. And when I say firm, I think it's a little bit exaggerated. It's really a bunch of guys that themselves actually say we became accidental venture capitalists because they were interested in the space. They started looking at it, and then money sort of came to them. Basically, institutional investors asked them, "Hey, can you invest some money for us?" And they started investing. So when I say firm, I feel like this whole thing feels a little bit more like a bunch of geeks turning into investors. Because, and here's the thing, like you can always say, this is fluff, this is hype and bubble and this and that. But you can also say, listen, there's something interesting here. The more work I'm doing in this space, when I mean space, I mean generally, blockchain technology. Let's call it blockchain technology. The more work I'm doing, the more inspired I get. It doesn't matter where I go. Let's say I looked at Bitcoin, I read the Bitcoin standard, and I really got interested in what Safedin Ammous has to say about that. Some of it is exaggerated. Maybe he's too extreme. Bitcoin maximalism is going way too far, and all of that stuff. I'm okay with, but the core, the fundamental ideas behind hard money, behind the network that allows for hard money and deflationary money and all of that stuff. It's an interesting concept. Then I look at Ethereum. There's a lot of interesting things about Ethereum, in particular the programmability of Ethereum and sort of the growth of smart contracts out of that. And then there's all these other L1 layers or chains that I came across, let's say Avalanche, Cosmos, Algorand, but token that I actually invested in. I lost a decent amount of money on that, but nevertheless, interesting concept. So there's a lot of these L1 chains that are interesting. And then there's the concept of DAOs. And I want to talk about this in this particular episode because this is something very dear to my heart. Fundamentally, DAOs are a technological, you have an ability to create a DAO because blockchain technology enables that. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Why is blockchain technology actually enabling that? And the question always comes, well, couldn't we have done this even before blockchain came up? Is this just a hype, or is there some real value there? But more interesting, also the other aspect, which is why are DAOs so interesting? It's I just read an essay by Hoppe, who's a sort of a libertarian economist, Austrian economist, and he spoke about radical decentralization within the context of the EU. And that's why this is so dear to my heart, because I grew up in Switzerland. I'm an independent person by heart, or by DNA even. My parents, they emigrated from the Balkans. They wanted to escape totalitarian regimes, coercion. They came to a country that probably encompasses freedom the best in the world, even better than the United States, which is Switzerland. And I grew up there, and I think I really have this core value of what Switzerland encompasses politically, which is this federalism. The choice is made at the lowest possible denominator of society, possibly the human. If not the human, then some sort of municipality. So we really don't have a lot of centralization there. It works really well for Switzerland. And the power of DAOs is that you could actually now try to mimic little Switzerland's, even smaller countries, companies. You can try to experiment now, or you can experiment. I don't need to use the word try. And this is what's so powerful. I want to talk about this in this episode. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's November 6, 2022. This is Krim Delco. It's a Sunday. There's no update. For the year, we're down 50.2%. The market's down 19.6%. We're underperforming by 30.6%. I want to jump right into the subject. So, like I said in the prelude, I'm talking about blockchain technology in general. And I'm so excited about the aspects. Like, this is kind of like water. Wherever I go, I find an avenue that gets me somewhere else, and I find inspiration, and I find really food for thought and food for even, all the topics that I talk about in this podcast, they're a sort of an amalgamation of ideas and concepts and inspirations that I have throughout my research. And you might ask yourself, why am I talking about this? This podcast, the purpose of the Not Even Wrong podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. We run Orange Capital Partners. It's a fairly traditional hedge fund. We have, stocks. We sometimes have currencies. We short stocks. We buy stocks. We buy commodities, short commodities. We do all that kind of stuff. But we're not really venture capitalists, and certainly not crypto investors and all of that stuff. But that doesn't really matter, in a sense that it doesn't matter so much what we actually do right now. Because, and this is one of the key messages that I have for my listeners, this is what you're doing today in terms of your portfolio is what you've been working on years ago. What you're going to do, what you're doing today in terms of work is going to reflect in your portfolio tomorrow. And we continuously try to find fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices with potentially large impact. So we think that blockchain technology is one of those things. It is a game-changing technology. It's not just the tech. It's not just the code that is different. In fact, the code per se is not so different. Zero-knowledge proofs have been around for 20, 30 years. They're now being used as roll-ups in order to facilitate L1 layers into L2 layers. The L1 technology in general is, there's some interesting concepts, but then you have things like Tendermint, which is trying to give you sort of cookie cutter is the wrong word, but a blank slate or a white label consensus mechanism that you can use in your L1 network and then tweak the network to your needs. So there's a lot of innovation, some new stuff, but what I'm trying to say here is that the engineering and the code are one thing, but I think whenever a technology takes off and becomes very impactful, it is because society encompasses it and starts to changing its behavior and its organization around that technology. And that's what's so exciting. That happened to the internet. Internet technology per se is not what's interesting. What's interesting is what happens around the internet with society. We have new businesses, we have political movements, social movements, all of that kind of stuff. And I think blockchain technology offers several avenues for society to change. And this is what's so exciting. This is why this is so dear to my heart. I've said it several times before that I feel that blockchain technology, smart contracts are kind of like we're back in the Renaissance, where the lawyers and the accountants and the doctors started to rise and replace authorities that were in place back then, such as kings, dukes, medicine men, whatever. And we're in a similar situation now, where we're replacing authority with new concepts. And the concept is smart contracts, blockchain technology. And I want to now specifically talk about DAOs, because this is what's so dear to my heart. Radical decentralization, this is a Hoppe essay that has been written. I don't think there's no mention of crypto or any of that stuff in this essay. What's so exciting is that this essay overlaps with what's happening in Silicon Valley. And when I mean Silicon Valley, I mean the mindset of Silicon Valley. Crypto is actually happening all over the world. It's not just here in this vicinity here, but that's besides the point. What's more interesting, again, I think it's again, when I say Silicon Valley, I just mean sort of the technology, entrepreneurial community around the world. And what Silicon Valley is delivering in terms of crypto, and particularly DAOs, is the ability to radically decentralize. And that means to find ways to organize. What is a DAO? It's a decentralized autonomous organization. And that organization can have different types of purposes. One could be to raise money to buy the US Constitution. Another one could be to start a company. A third could be to start a country. There is this book, the name eludes me, and I put in the show notes, the decentralized individual, the digital individual. I don't remember exactly the book. It doesn't matter. It's the guy who's saying that we have this ability now to start new countries. The citizen is not confined anymore to a country. The citizen can be any, a conglomerate of people all over the world, that kind of thing. I think all these things are overlapping and becoming one thing. And I think the DAO itself is interesting because it allows for experimentation. This is what's so exciting. Everything we do at Orange Capital Partners always comes down to iteration. In other words, when we see opportunity for iteration at scale, meaning rapid iteration with low cost of error and low cost of error correction, that's when our lights turn on. That's when we start getting excited, because that smells disruption. Humans are not very good at coming up with concepts just like that. It's in our nature to try and error, Popper did not come up with his theories and reinvent the wheel. He just saw something that maybe others don't see or don't want to see, which is that we're not born intelligent and knowing and smart and all of that. We have to work hard to get there. And the way we do that is by try and error. So whenever we have technologies or tools that help us to iterate, that's when we progress. And blockchain technology is one of those things that can be applied in particular to the organization of society. That's what's so exciting here. So while we had this thing called countries and constitutions and all of that stuff for a couple hundred years now, and before that for almost 2 millennia, we had just this, kingdom and emperors and all that. Actually more than 2 millennia. We had the Greeks and then the Romans, and then there were the barbarians and all that, but even they, for themselves, we were always organized in a similar way. And then we had this invention called democracy, which sort of rooted back to the Greek and then went through the Renaissance. And so we had these innovations in how society is organized. But we never had the ability to iterate faster. Let's try it. How about we try Switzerland with a bunch of different tools? How about we change the parameters? How about we do direct democracy, but in this way, not that way, and so on and so forth. Very difficult to do in the normal setting today. But with DAOs, we now have a tool that could allow us to experiment. We can experiment with companies. We can experiment with what kind of talent to hire in what type of company. So there's lots and lots of interesting concepts that blockchain technology allows us to do. Now, one of the big questions that I have, and this is an open question, so I'm open to comments, is, okay, how is blockchain technology exactly enabling DAOs? Like, what is it that we couldn't do that we can do now? And the answer that the crypto folks will give us is, well, we had the age of pre-internet where information transport was costly. Not just information transport, but the storage of information was costly. In other words, databases were local. Databases were local. So if you were sitting in Australia, you didn't know what somebody did in London. And to know that, you had to transmit that data. And you could do that in certain ways, but the internet facilitated that dramatically. So the internet allowed for faster exchange of information. Now we can say, well, you could build DAOs around the internet. Yes, you can, but you have validity problems. You have problems of validity. Validity means, is what you say and is what I see really what's the truth? What's the ground truth in a transaction? What is the ground truth in a transaction? That's validity, and that's what the blockchain enables. This guy, and I think it's Avid Garg or something like that from Electric Capital, he had this interview recently that I think was really interesting, where he said, we have the internet, which optimizes certain parameters, speed of data transmission, storage of data in decentralized forms, and so on and so forth. Now, how about we change some of those parameters? How about we optimize not for speed of data transmission, but for validity? How about we make the data transmission actually slow, but valid? In other words, what I see is what I see. It's the truth. But it might not be as fast and as scalable as the internet. So in other words, If I use blockchain technology to validate Twitter, maybe I can't tweet every second and it gets posted. Maybe it will take a minute or two for my post to be validated and then gets posted, or maybe even 10 minutes. But imagine the value of a network like that, where everything that's posted is validated. I know who did it, and I know it's true. In other words, I know whatever was posted first was really posted by the person that says they posted it. And I could also add layers to, validate, fact-checking, things like that. We could do that. It's possible. If we can have a network of validators that can validate financial transactions, well, we could have a network of validators that validate information. And all of a sudden, the concept of misinformation gets rephrased or maybe even solved, or the problem of misinformation. So I am incredibly excited about the concept of DAOs when it comes to applications such as iterating around organizations. That's incredibly valuable. I think as a species, as a society, we're not iterating enough around organizations. We have corporations, we have Silicon Valley, we have venture capital, we have Wall Street. So there's a lot of domains, nuances. It's not like we're static. Venture capital didn't exist 50 years ago. Now it's a big industry. We have different types of venture capital now. We have these types of electric capital, which is very different than Kleiner Perkins buyers and blah, blah, blah. Just look at the names, okay? People aren't using the names anymore. It's not, Lee, Ashwin, Johnson. They don't give themselves names like that anymore. They call themselves electric capital or Ave capital or blah, blah, blah. So in other words, there is change, but imagine with DAOs, we could have even faster change. Now, what's the end goal of this? Again, I'm a very Popperian person. There's no absolute goal. There's no absolute, this is the ground truth of, let's say, the best possible way to organize society. I think society, companies should be organized around needs. Teams should be built around needs, and they should adapt to the needs of the environment. And I think DAOs allow us to do that. So to summarize, my excitement about blockchain technology is just going bigger and bigger. And the reason is because there is so much interesting revelations coming out. The more work I do in terms of understanding, let's say, what it is that blockchain technology enables, the more inspired I get. The reason I get inspired is because I can see problems that can be solved, big problems, such as, for example, how can people communicate with each other in a decentralized way and they know whatever they talk to each other about. Let's say, okay, excuse me for another tangent here. If we take blockchain technology and we just look at it and we say blockchain technology is just, blockchains are decentralized databases. So what layer ones are is just a way to organize decentralized database. And then we add transactions to that, so it's a dynamic decentralized database. That's what the blockchain is. And the consensus technology within the blockchain, within the layer, is simply the way we make sure that the data is validated, that it's sure, that it's true, and that it's reproducible, and all of that stuff that we want from a database that we expect. So that's what blockchain technology is. Now, having said with all of that, now we can start saying, well, if we have a massive decentralized database that can record transactions and validate transactions, then maybe we can do something with it that is, that is even more interesting than just transmitting data. Maybe we can build organizations around it. So this is the path that I'm going, and again, it's very interesting. We're going to have a lot more. Episodes about this. I mean, this is just the beginning, and I wish I could start announcing investments. We own some Bitcoin, we own Algorand, we own Ethereum. That's it. So it's not a big deal for us right now in terms of investments, but in terms of work, again, a lot of work, a lot of interesting people we meet, a lot of interesting concepts, and that's what really matters. So to summarize, This episode is about DAOs. It's not just about DAOs. DAOs, the decentralized autonomous organizations, are an interesting sort of derivative out of the blockchain technology that is being developed. And the reason that's so interesting is because it allows us to iterate around organizational forms. Societies can be organized in different ways, countries, companies, projects. You can start working on projects with different types of people in different types of ways. And the fundamental reason you can do that is because blockchain technology is a decentralized database, dynamic database that can add new transactions. They can be validated. And again, what is a decentralized database? It's an accumulation of data that is validated, that is we can be sure that the data in that database is it is what it is, and when new transactions happen, the updates are true. There's a ground truth that we can trust, and this trust allows us to build. There's the concept of composability. We can build on top of things because we don't have to go down every time, layer and layer, and make sure everything is correct. So that is the idea. There's not tons of applications right now that we can go and solve problems right now, make money and have businesses. You know, we could build a technology that allows Teslas to load up cryptocurrency, and then you can pay tolls with that, or parking meters and all that. It's possible. It's not happening right now for various reasons, but there are applications that we can see right now where, let's say, money can be used, fintech can be used, and all that stuff. But that's not even what we're talking about. We're just talking about the concept and the inspiration and the fact that this idea of crypto and blockchain technology has in itself enormous dynamics and enormous inspirational force that we cherish at Orange Capital Partners, because this is the source of how we hopefully can generate wealth. Thank you.